Audio described interview with Mary Roubos, The Bone Sparrow, 11 minutes 24. Mary Roubos, who plays Jimmy, is a young white woman with dark hair in a fringe bob. She's wearing a black jumper, high at the neck, and chunky silver hoop earrings. She's sitting in a white dressing room in front of two mirrors with lights around them. Text. How did you interpret Jimmy's character?
I interpreted Jimmy as a very spirited, brave, curious, independent girl. And I think her role in the story is to provide hope for Subi and strength as well, to help him find his voice, particularly at the end. But for me, I think Jimmy represents not all of Australians, but a lot of Australians' naivety and maybe ignorance to a lot of what's going on in the detention centres and with the refugee crisis. And I think for me, Jimmy really shows, even though you might not know what's going on, or you might be naive to what's going on, you can really ask questions and to find out things. And Jimmy is told by her mates at school that the refugees are really cool. They have everything and they've got lots of cool books and clothes and that, but she's not sure about that, and she goes and questions it, which I think, for me, that showed she has lots of independence and curiosity and, yeah.
Text. How does Jimmy's character develop throughout the story?
So Jimmy's development throughout the story, I think for me, I tried to kind of start in her first scene where she appears. I tried to kind of show her kind of tough side, her brave side, and even though she is quite lonely, I think she has no friends at school really, and she has no one at home. So her first meeting with Subi, I think she wants to come across as like a really cool girl, hoping to kind of like make friends with this new guy that she meets. But then slowly, I feel like her vulnerability comes out, and the closer she becomes to Subi, you can see that she's quite desperate and quite lonely, and struggling really in her life, as Subi is. I tried to kind of start with her kind of tough side and kind of slowly bring out her vulnerability and her kind of struggles.
Text. How did you show the development in your character through your performance?
So it was quite difficult to show her Jimmy's development. The challenge for me was that Jimmy in the play has a very, very small space on stage. She only performs for 90% of it, she's on the corner of the stage. Which I think works really well for the play. But I had to find in her wildness and her brave side, and I think she's a bit of a tomboy as well, and she goes climbing trees and running out to the lake in the desert, but I had to depict that in a small space. So I kind of wanted to start with Jimmy's physicality, and kind of I used the space. I paced her a lot. I made her very fidgety and very sort of uncomfortable in that surrounding she was aware of in the detention centre. She couldn't sit still, so she was always standing up, sitting down, pacing up and down the fence, sort of looking everywhere, kind of darting, her eyes were going everywhere, and she wasn't kind of sure. And then I think throughout, particularly in the second half of the play, I kind of found like she was more grounded, and the closer she became with Subi, I found myself kind of lying on the floor more often, a bit more calm. And so I think that development of my sort of physicality was very I used lots of heights and the pacing, and then, contrasted that to her kind of being more still and grounded and comfortable with Subi towards the end. And I found it really interesting because the more brave I was trying to make Jimmy, I think the more kind of weak she was in her physicality. So the pacing and that kind of fidgety kind of Jimmy was quite weak. But then when she found her stillness and found her vulnerable side and let out some emotions with Subi, there's quite a strength in that because she's quite still and comfortable, which I found really nice and fun to explore.
Text. How would you describe the relationship between Jimmy and Subi?
I love the relationship between Jimmy and Subi. I find their dialogue so refreshing and blunt and honest. I think their relationship is so raw. Unlike, two adults meeting and engaging in a very polite conversation, I feel like Jimmy and Subi, there's a beauty in their bluntness, and they remove all that nonsense, and they can just chat really honestly. I find it really refreshing and nice. And Subi will say something really emotional to Jimmy and really deep, and Jimmy will just go, "Oh yeah," and then tell him something completely different. And Jimmy will do the same. Jimmy will say, "Oh, I lost my mum, or my mum's dead," and Subi will go, "Yeah, cool, okay." And they sort of don't dwell in their own sadness, which I find, and it doesn't mean they don't listen to each other. It kind of, you get this sense that they really understand each other, but they don't need to dwell on each other's kind of misfortunes or sad, their sad things that they're telling each other. I love them for that. And I feel like their relationship, because of that and because of the way they can talk to each other, is accelerated. In the beginning of rehearsals, the actor who plays Subi and I were sort of a magnet. We kept wanting to be really close to each other and to the fence. And Esther, the director, was like, "No, we know you like each other, but that's sort of where you want to end things, So we kind of worked with this idea of being in an elastic band. And so there are moments where we kind of had to sort of pull apart on stage and find that distance between us, even though we're talking between a fence. And then moments where we're really drawn to each other. And I think that's where it changes from the start of the play, where that elastic band is quite wide, and then sort of the end of the play, it sort of inevitably sort of comes close together. But I think it was quite challenging because it's very, we just wanted to always be near each other. And Esther was like, "No, come on, there's moments where, you've got to step away to kind of see and hear each other properly," which was really interesting, really cool. But I love their relationship. It was really fun to play with that, and not being able to be, to be separated by that fence was really, really interesting. And sharing our thoughts to each other, but we know we had to share the thoughts out to the audience as well, which was a challenge, but yeah, good challenge.
What is Jimmy's role within the play?
Yeah, I think Jimmy's role in the play, because she is the only person on the outside of the detention centre, I think her role is to show sort of what people on the outside can do, especially, when they're unaware of what's going on inside the detention centres, or they're uneducated, or they're naive about the refugee crisis. I feel like Jimmy represents that side of humanity that is curious and wants to learn and wants to ask questions, and wants to find out for themselves what's really going on. So I think she plays a really important role in that aspect, because, in the novel, I know that there's a section where Jimmy's father reads the newspaper and sees the photo of the refugees in the newspaper and says something like, "Oh, that's really sad, isn't it?" And then turns the page to the sports section. But Jimmy, on the other hand, is like, "No, I want to go to the detention centre and I want to find out what's really going on myself." And I think that's incredible. If a 12-year-old girl can do that, then, anyone can.
Yellow screen with Pilot Theatre, Lottery and Arts Council England logos.